In today's episode, we'll uncover 3 horrifying stories of people who became victims of feral bears, even though they used bear spray. A seasoned cyclist who ignored multiple warnings and encountered a grizzly, an old couple caught in the clutches of a wild bear in their tent, and a devoted father and daughter whose dream hike turned into a brutal fight for survival. We've got some wild stories. First, we begin with the story of Leah Davis Loken. July 6, 2021 was supposed to be another night of adventure under the stars for Leah, but by dawn she would be gone. The 65-year-old was no stranger to the wild, having spent her life pushing limits and embracing nature's challenges. A registered surgical recovery nurse, a competitive cyclist, and a fierce adventurer, Leah thrived in the outdoors. She had spent the day cycling through Montana's grizzly country, part of an ultra-endurance event stretching nearly 4,000 kilometers from Banff, Canada to New Mexico. The vast wilderness of Ovando, Montana was exactly the kind of place she loved, rugged, remote, and breathtakingly beautiful. But what Leah failed to consider was that she wasn't alone. Earlier that day, residents and officials had reported sightings of a lone grizzly bear, a food-conditioned predator that had lost its natural fear of humans. Leah's sister and fellow riders pleaded with her to stay in a hotel for the night. They knew how dangerous the bear could be, but Leah, stubborn and fearless, refused. She set up her solitary tent next to the Blackfoot River, unknowingly placing herself in a predator's hunting ground. At 3 a.m., Leah was jarred awake by the sound of snuffing and heavy breathing just outside her tent. She held her breath, trying to process what was happening. A massive shadow loomed over the fabric, the silhouette of something far too big to be anything but a grizzly bear. Then, sniffing right above her head. Her heart pounded in her chest as she realized the bear was actively investigating her. Leah screamed. The sudden outburst startled Kim and Joe Cole, a couple camping nearby. They jolted awake, their senses immediately on high alert as Leah's terrified screams echoed through the night. Without hesitation, they joined in, shouting as loud as they could, their voices piercing the darkness. The bear, seemingly unsettled by the sudden human commotion, let out a sharp huff before retreating into the shadows, vanishing into the thick Montana wilderness. The air remained heavy with tension, the silence after the chaos almost deafening. Every second felt stretched as they strained to hear any sign of the grizzly still lingering nearby. But the danger, for now, seemed to have passed. Leah trembled as Kim and Joe rushed to her side, their hands gripping her shoulders as they tried to steady her. She was visibly shaken, her breathing ragged, but physically unharmed. Her pulse raced as she struggled to comprehend just how close she had come to death. Kim urged her to get out of there as fast as she could because she knew that wasn't a friendly bear. There was an urgency in her tone, a plea for Leah to see reason. But Leah, ever the experienced adventurer, remained defiant. She had encountered wildlife before and had always managed to handle it. In her mind, this was no different. She assured them she would take extra precautions, certain that the bear had only been passing through, lured by a faint scent of food. Determined to prevent another encounter, Leah carefully removed every food item from her tent, placing it nearly 30 feet away. She double-checked for anything that might emit an odor, diligently scouring her belongings for even the smallest crumbs. The couple stood by, watching her work, unconvinced but unwilling to argue further. Leah was methodical, confident in her preparation. She had followed every safety protocol she had ever learned, ensuring that nothing remained inside her tent that could attract the predator again. She believed she had done enough. She believed the danger had passed. But it hadn't. Just an hour later at exactly 4 a.m., Kim and Joe were wrenched awake once more. This time, it wasn't a scream that cut through the silence, but a series of horrific, gut-wrenching noises. Thrashing, heavy panting, the distinct sound of a struggle. It was happening. Joe's blood ran cold as he scrambled for his flashlight, fumbling with the zipper of his tent. As soon as he stepped outside, his stomach lurched at the sight before him. Leah's tent was collapsing. flattened under the sheer weight of the massive grizzly bear. The canvas sagged violently, shifting and twitching under the beast's brutal assault. Joe's heart pounded as he grabbed his bear spray and sprinted toward Leia's tent, Kim right behind him. Without hesitation, he aimed and unleashed a full blast of bear spray directly at the animal's face. The burning chemical should have sent it fleeing, but the bear didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a deep, guttural roar, momentarily recoiling but not abandoning its grip on Leia. Kim, shaking, fired her own canister, the air filling with the acrid scent of the repellent. Finally, the grizzly released its hold, staggering backward and disappearing into the woods as suddenly as it had arrived. Panting, Joe and Kim rushed forward, adrenaline fueling their every movement. They ripped open the tent, desperate to reach Leia. But the moment their eyes fell upon her, they froze. A suffocating wave of dread settled over them as they stared in horror. Leia wasn't moving. Her body lay unnaturally twisted, contorted in a way that sent a chill down their spines. The weight of the 500-pound grizzly had crushed her, snapping her spine in the process. Blood pooled around her, soaking into the shredded fabric of the tent. The attack had been instantaneous and brutal. There had been no time to fight, no time to escape. She was gone before she ever had a chance to scream. She had been gone before she even had a chance to fight back. Investigators arrived at the scene hours later. What they found confirmed their worst fears. Leia had been well prepared, but she had made one fatal mistake. Inside the tent, authorities discovered a small bag of dried blueberries, one Leia had overlooked. Just outside, a sandal bag full of food sat within reach of her tent's entrance. It was all the confirmation they needed. The grizzly had returned, not just out of curiosity, but with intent. It had learned that humans meant food. 3 days later, on July 9th, wildlife officers spotted a grizzly bear breaking into a chicken coop. They shot and killed it on the spot. DNA analysis confirmed the truth. This was the bear that killed Leia Loken. Leia Loken was fearless, but even the most experienced adventurers can miscalculate the dangers of the wild. She thought she was prepared, but one small oversight cost her life. Her tragic death serves as a grim reminder. When venturing into grizzly country, you can never be too careful. Unfortunately, they weren't the only victims. Doug and Jenny met a similar fate. It was late September 2023, and for Doug Inglis and Jenny Gus, this was supposed to be yet another thrilling yet peaceful trip to the remote wilderness of Banff National Park in Alberta, Canada. This wasn't just any hiking adventure, it was a cherished tradition they had upheld for decades. Twice a year, the couple ventured into the backcountry, once in the spring and again in the fall, embracing the solitude and serenity that nature provided. At 62 years old, both Doug and Jenny were seasoned outdoor enthusiasts, with extensive experience in hiking, canoeing, whitewater rafting, and camping. They weren't reckless thrill seekers, but cautious, methodical nature lovers. Each time they traveled into the backcountry, they took every safety precaution possible. They carried survival kits, emergency equipment, and bear spray, adhering strictly to bear safety protocols. Doug and Jenny had been inseparable since university, sharing both their personal lives and professional careers. They worked as technicians in the same scientific lab, a testament to their deep partnership both at work and in life. But even with their wealth of experience in the outdoors, nothing could have prepared them for what would happen next. Banff National Park is Canada's oldest national park, known for its rugged mountain peaks, thick forests, and pristine glacial rivers. It's home to some of North America's most magnificent and dangerous predators, including wolves, cougars, and black bears. But the most formidable predator of all is the grizzly bear. Approximately 65 grizzlies are known to inhabit Banff, alongside an additional 20 to 40 black bears. While attacks on humans are rare, grizzlies are unpredictable, immensely powerful, and in certain conditions, deadly. During hyperphagia season, when bears enter a stage of extreme hunger before hibernation, their behavior becomes even more erratic and aggressive. Still, Doug and Jenny were prepared. They followed every safety rule, always stayed on signposted routes, and checked for park warnings before setting up camp. On that fateful trip in September, no recent bear sightings had been reported in the area. There were no official warnings. Everything suggested that this would be just another routine backcountry adventure. By day 5 of their week-long hike, Doug and Jenny had covered miles of rough terrain. With their faithful dog by their side, they trekked through the Red Deer River Valley, a remote, roadless stretch of untouched wilderness. They hadn't quite reached their planned campsite, but decided to set up camp early to avoid trekking in the dark, a wise decision considering the potential risks. At 5 p.m., Doug sent a check-in message via Garmin InReach, a satellite emergency device, to his uncle Colin Inglis. The message was routine, a simple assurance. "We didn't make the planned campsite, but setting up camp now. Everything's okay." Little did they know this would be their last message. As the sun set, Doug and Jenny followed strict food storage procedures. Their food was carefully hung in a tree far from their tent. They cleaned up their camp, ensuring no food odors lingered. With their bear spray close by, they crawled into their tent for the night, reading on their e-readers, a nightly tradition before sleeping under the stars. But something was lurking in the darkness. Unbeknownst to Doug and Jenny, a grizzly bear was already closing in on their campsite. In the thick darkness of the backcountry, its keen nose worked overtime, detecting scents imperceptible to humans. It could have been the faint remnants of their dinner, the subtle human scent lingering in the cold air, or perhaps simply the sound of movement within the tent. Whatever the reason, the bear had locked onto them, and it was coming closer. A shadow in the night, moving silently, circling. The couple, deeply engrossed in their e-readers, felt it before they heard it. A shift in the atmosphere. A heavy presence just beyond the thin walls of nylon. Their dog, always alert, suddenly stiffened. Its ears perked up, its body tense. Then, a soft sniffing, a shuffling noise, a low, guttural sound vibrating in the night air. Doug and Jenny froze, their pulses quickened. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Neither of them dared to breathe. The dog let out a single low growl, barely audible but full of warning. Then the tent ripped open. Like a knife through paper, the grizzly's claws tore through the fabric with a sound like a gunshot in the silence. A second later, a massive, fur-covered head shoved through the opening, its dark eyes gleaming in the dim glow of their reading lights. The bear didn't hesitate. With a powerful swipe, it collapsed the tent, forcing Doug and Jenny onto their backs as they scrambled to escape. The dog lunged, barking furiously, snapping at the beast, trying desperately to protect its owners. But the bear was unstoppable. With a single swipe of its paw, it sent the dog sprawling, its yelp piercing the night. Doug grabbed his bear spray. His hand shook, but he managed to aim it directly at the bear's face and unleash a full, blinding blast. Nothing. The grizzly didn't even flinch. If anything, the powerful irritant infuriated it even more. It let out a deafening roar, shaking its head violently, then charged straight into the remains of the tent, snapping its massive jaws. Jenny scrambled backward, fumbling for her own canister. She managed to fire a second spray, the chemicals misting into the air. The bear recoiled slightly, shaking its head, but it didn't run. It wasn't acting defensively anymore. This was a startled bear reacting out of fear. This was a hunt. Doug and Jenny had nowhere to run. The tent was half collapsed, the exits blocked, and their only defense, the bear spray, had failed. They tried everything they could, screaming, kicking, throwing anything they could reach. But the bear relentlessly pursued them, tearing through sleeping bags, equipment, anything in its path. Somehow, amidst the chaos and blood, one of them, no one will ever know who, managed to grab the Garmin device and press the SOS button. It was their final plea for help. At 8:15 p.m., the message reached Colin Inglis. The words were staggeringly simple yet chillingly final. Bear attack bad. That was all. No explanation, no time for more, just 3 words. Then silence. The emergency alert immediately mobilized the Wildlife Human Attack Response Team, a highly trained unit specializing in animal-related emergencies. But fate was against them. A thick fog rolled into the valley. Visibility plummeted. A helicopter rescue was out of the question, meaning the team had to trek on foot. The terrain was brutal. Steep rocky slopes, dense underbrush, and treacherous river crossings slowed them down. Armed with rifles, medical gear, and flashlights, the responders pushed forward, knowing that every second mattered. When they finally reached the site at 1 a.m., what they found was horrific. Silence. Then the sight of 3 lifeless bodies. Doug, Jenny, and their dog all lying outside the tent. The tent was flattened, ripped apart like shredded paper. Scattered on the ground were 2 empty cans of bear spray, evidence of their last stand against the predator. Inside the remains of the tent, their e-readers lay broken, their final pages unread. The campsite showed signs of a brutal struggle, but even more disturbingly, the bear had not left. From within the tree line, a dark figure shifted. A low growl rumbled through the clearing, and then it charged. The same bear was coming for them. One of the rescue officers raised his rifle and fired. The grizzly dropped just feet away, its massive body collapsing into the undergrowth. Later, a necropsy confirmed the grizzly was a 25-year-old female. She was underweight with poor teeth, suggesting she had struggled to find food, perhaps leading her to hunt humans. Unlike most grizzlies, which attack defensively and leave, this bear had stayed near the scene, waiting. It was a predatory attack, something exceedingly rare in Banff's history. The last known fatal grizzly attack in the park had occurred in 1973, when a heavily sedated bear killed a biologist during its release. For Doug and Jenny's family, the tragedy was unthinkable. Even with decades of experience, even after deploying 2 full cans of bear spray, it hadn't been enough. In a quite similar event, Johan and Jenna fought tooth and nail with a grizzly too. Watch what happened to them. It was a perfect August morning in Montana's Glacier National Park, the kind that made the wilderness seem almost inviting. The towering peaks, the crisp mountain air, and the endless stretches of untouched land gave visitors the illusion of peace. But nature has no mercy, and for Johan and Jenna Otter, their dream hike would become an unimaginable nightmare. Montana is one of the most breathtaking yet dangerous landscapes in the United States. Spanning over 147,000 square miles, it's home to a vast array of wildlife: white-tailed deer, wolverines, elk, coyotes, and wolves. But none are as feared as the grizzly bear. For centuries, this apex predator has ruled these lands, its immense power making it one of North America's deadliest animals. For father and daughter Johan and Jenna Otter, this was supposed to be a special bonding trip. Jenna, a young and athletic dancer, was about to begin her freshman year at the University of California, Irvine, and this was one last adventure before she left home. Johan, a seasoned marathon runner, saw the trip as a perfect way to celebrate a new chapter in their lives, unaware that this journey would be etched into history for an entirely different reason. The morning of August 25th started with the golden glow of sunlight filtering through the Montana wilderness. The previous day had been rainy, but today was different. The mist had cleared and the trail sparkled under the morning sun. At 7:30 a.m., Johan and Jenna set out for a hike, eager to make the most of the beautiful weather. As they climbed, a thick carpet of thimbleberry bushes lined the trail, their red fruit glistening like tiny jewels. Bear grass and wild lilies swayed gently beneath the towering spruce and pine trees, and beyond the dense foliage, Lake Josephine shimmered in the distance. The 2 hikers, already above the tree line within 40 minutes, paused to take in the snow-dusted peaks that surrounded them. It felt like they had stepped into a postcard. Both were aware of the dangers that lurked in Montana's backcountry. They had studied the precautionary measures, knew the rules of hiking in bear country, and made sure to talk loudly to avoid surprising any animals along the way. They had bear spray with them, but it was buried inside Johan's backpack, a mistake that would soon prove catastrophic. Jenna had an uneasy feeling, the kind that gnawed at the back of her mind. The early morning hours were when wildlife was most active, and though she trusted her father, a deep instinct told her something wasn't quite right. They continued their climb in companionable silence, marveling at the breathtaking views of Glacier National Park. When Johann stopped to film the landscape with his camera, Jenna told her father to just head back home. Johann chuckled, snapping out of his trance, and quickly caught up to his daughter. Then it happened. Jenna had taken just a few steps ahead when she rounded a bend in the trail and froze. A massive brown silhouette moved in front of her. Jenna's heart slammed into her chest. A grizzly bear, a fully grown mother, stood just feet away, 2 yearling cubs trailing behind her. The bear hadn't seen them yet. Grizzlies rely on their extraordinary sense of smell to detect threats, but the wind was blowing down the mountain, preventing the animal from catching their scent. Then Jenna moved. The sudden motion caught the mother bear's attention. The grizzly snapped her head toward the hikers. A mother bear with cubs is the most dangerous kind of grizzly. Their protective instincts override everything, and this mother saw Jenna and Johann as a threat. Jenna panicked. She screamed, turned, and ran, a fatal mistake when dealing with grizzlies. Johann looked up and saw the charging beast. He didn't hesitate. Johann dropped his backpack and threw himself in front of his daughter. The grizzly slammed into him like a freight train, clamping her 3-inch canines into his thigh. Johann screamed in agony. The bear's bite force is approximately 1160 psi, strong enough to crush bone. Jenna stood frozen in horror as she watched her father being ripped apart before her very eyes. The grizzly shook him violently, her powerful jaws digging deeper into his flesh. Johann kicked and thrashed, but it was useless. The beast was too strong. The attack was swift, brutal, and merciless. The grizzly's grip on Johann was relentless, its massive jaws clamped onto his leg, the teeth grinding against muscle and bone. The pain was unimaginable, but amid the chaos, Johann's survival instincts kicked in. He knew he had to get free, to put distance between himself and the bear. Scanning his surroundings, he saw 3 options: the steep mountain face to his right, a sharp drop to his left, and an alder patch just 20 feet behind him. The choice was clear. With every ounce of strength he had left, Johann launched himself into the alder patch, crashing onto his side. The impact was jarring. His head smacked against a rock, his right eye split open, and his body trembled with shock. But he was alive. Johann barely had time to register his injuries before the realization hit him. Jenna was still on the trail, alone with the bear. He screamed at her, his voice hoarse with desperation, ordering her to jump toward him. But Jenna, frozen in fear, had spotted the bear spray, their only defense. She scrambled toward Johann's backpack, fumbling to retrieve the canister. Her hand shook as she tried to figure out how to use it, but the seconds ticked by too quickly. There was no time. She had to run. Heart pounding, she leapt from the trail without knowing what lay beneath her, choosing the unknown over the certainty of the bear's wrath. Johann, still reeling from his escape, didn't realize Jenna had jumped. He continued to yell, his voice echoing through the wilderness. But the bear had already turned its attention to him. It poked its head over the ledge, sniffing the air, its eyes locking onto Johann's battered form. The illusion of safety in the alder patch was shattered. In an instant, the bear launched itself from the slope, closing the 20-foot gap effortlessly. Johann had never seen something so massive move so fast. The impact was devastating. The bear's claws tore into his back, shredding his clothes and carving deep gouges into his flesh. Johann curled into a fetal position, trying to shield himself from the worst of the attack. But the grizzly was determined. It clamped its powerful jaws onto him, lifting him from the ground like a rag doll, shaking him violently. Johann thrashed, kicking and twisting, desperate to break free. His mind raced. He had to keep the bear away from Jenna at all costs. Then, the ground beneath him disappeared. In the struggle, Johann was hurled off the ledge, plummeting 30 feet down. His body slammed against the rocks below, his face taking the brunt of the impact. Everything went black. For a moment, he thought he was dead, but then the pain flooded back in waves. His skull throbbed, his ribs ached, and blood poured from open wounds. Yet, somehow, miraculously, he was alive. As he forced himself upright, a horrifying realization struck him. He had fallen onto the same ledge where Jenna had landed. And worse, the bear was still coming. Johann barely had time to react before the grizzly reared up, towering over them. A 10-foot behemoth, its blood-matted fur bristling, eyes locked on its next kill. Jenna crouched behind a bush, frozen. There was nowhere left to run. The bear dropped onto all fours and charged. Johann stood his ground, terror and resolve battling inside him. He had to buy Jenna time. Desperately, he grabbed for a rock, his only weapon, but it crumbled in his grasp. The bear was already there. The attack was worse than before. Its jaws clamped onto Johann's arm, tearing muscle from bone. Pain exploded through him, but he fought back, kicking, punching, anything to slow it down. The grizzly was relentless. It lunged again, locking its jaws around his head. Johann felt his scalp rip, his skull crack. His screams vanished into the wilderness. Watching from just feet away, Jenna was frozen in horror. She wanted to help, to do anything, but she knew that if she moved, the bear would turn on her next. She had to think fast, but Johann had already made his decision. With his last ounce of strength, Johann wrenched free from the bear's grip and leapt off the cliff. He tumbled through the air, expecting death, but miraculously landed on a small rocky ledge below. Pain erupted through his body, but when he looked up, he saw it. A sheer drop, just steep enough to keep the bear from following. He was safe. But Jenna was still in danger. The bear sniffed the air, catching the scent of her blood. Slowly, it turned toward the bushes where she was hiding. Jenna clenched her teeth, her entire body trembling. The bear stepped closer, its massive paws crushing the underbrush. Then, suddenly, it lunged. The jaws clamped onto Jenna's head, tearing through flesh and bone, ripping her lower jaw open. White-hot pain shot through her body, but somehow, in that moment of sheer agony, Jenna found clarity. She went limp. She played dead. The bear paused, its breath hot against her face. It sniffed, licked the blood, then, just like that, it backed away. Jenna remained motionless, not daring to breathe. Her head spun, her vision blurred, but she stayed completely still. The grizzly lingered for a moment longer, then, satisfied that the threat was neutralized, it turned and disappeared into the trees. For 2 agonizing minutes, Johann lay below, holding his breath, waiting for the nightmare to end. Then, Jenna's faint voice cut through the silence, calling out for her dad. Johann's entire body sagged with relief. She was alive. Shaking, he reached up and touched his head. His fingers met exposed bone. He could feel the jagged edge of where his scalp had been torn away. The shock was wearing off and the pain was setting in. If he didn't get help soon, he wouldn't last much longer. Then, Jenna began to scream for help. Her shouts echoed through the valley, bouncing off the mountains. Johann joined in, their combined cries carrying across the wilderness. For what felt like an eternity, they screamed. Then, a response. Hikers. Rescuers arrived 2 hours later, their faces pale as they took in the carnage. Johann and Jenna were barely clinging to life, their bodies mangled, their blood staining the rocks. Johann suffered a severed spine and neck, a torn scalp, a punctured eye, broken ribs, and deep lacerations across his body. Jenna's face had been partially torn apart, but they had survived. After 9 surgeries and months in the hospital, Johann fully recovered. Jenna started university, her body wrapped in bandages, her scars a permanent reminder of the day they nearly died. Reflecting on the attack, Johann knew one thing. They had made one critical mistake. Their bear spray should have been accessible. Jenna should have known how to use it. A simple moment of preparation could have saved them from the worst pain of their lives. But despite it all, they were alive.